Spooked. How Not to Prevent Violent Extremism. By Arun Kundnani. 2009. 1 Key Findings. The PREVENT program, with a budget in 2008/9 of £140 million, is a part of the government's counter-terrorist strategy which focuses on mobilizing communities to oppose the ideology of violent extremism. With the revised counter-terrorist strategy published in March 2009, the focus of PREVENT widened to promoting shared values as well as opposing violent extremism. The government claims PREVENT is communities-led, but PREVENT funding has not been driven by a decision-making process in which local agencies identify their own needs and access central government funds accordingly. Rather, local authorities have been pressured to accept PREVENT funding in direct proportion to the numbers of Muslims in their area, in effect, constructing the Muslim population as a suspect community. PREVENT decision-making lacks transparency and accountability. Decisions are taken behind closed doors rather than in consultation with the voluntary and community sector. Rather than engaging local people democratically, many local authorities seem to take the view that decisions over PREVENT are best made away from public scrutiny. In its early stages, most local authority-based PREVENT work has been targeted capacity building of Muslim communities, focusing particularly on young people, women, and mosques. This has led many participants to believe that deprived communities with many needs have effectively been told that their voluntary sector organizations can only access the resources to meet these needs if they are willing to sign up to the PREVENT program, which brings with it the danger of alienating the very people who need to be won over. PREVENT has undermined many progressive elements within the earlier community cohesion agenda and absorbed from it those parts which are most problematic. Initially, PREVENT funding allowed some projects to continue doing progressive cross-community work. But, more recently, PREVENT, with its focus on a single group, has undermined this aspect of the cohesion agenda. Often the relationship between a local authority and its Muslim citizens is conducted through the very same community gatekeepers which the community cohesion agenda had identified as being problematic and divisive. There is strong evidence that a significant part of the PREVENT program involves the embedding of counter-terrorism police officers within the delivery of local services, the purpose of which seems to be to gather intelligence on Muslim communities, to identify areas, groups, and individuals that are at risk and to then facilitate interventions, such as the Channel program, as well as more general police engagement with the Muslim community, to manage perceptions of grievances. PREVENT-funded voluntary sector organizations and workers in local authorities are becoming increasingly wary of the expectations on them to act as providers of information to the police. The imposition of information sharing requirements on teachers and youth, community, and cultural workers undercuts professional norms of confidentiality. Moreover, it will be impossible to generate the trust that the government sees as one of the aims of PREVENT if there is any suspicion that local services have a hidden agenda. There is a perception that the government is sponsoring Muslim organizations on the basis of theological criteria, for example, holding Shias to be intrinsically more moderate than Sunnis. Such an approach runs counter to the secular separation of church and state, even though such a separation is itself upheld by the government as a marker of moderation which Muslims should aspire to. The atmosphere promoted by PREVENT is one in which to make radical criticisms of the government is to risk losing funding and facing isolation as an extremist, while those organizations which support the government are rewarded. This in turn undermines the kind of radical discussions of political issues that would need to occur if young people are to be won over and support for illegitimate political violence diminished. The current emphasis of PREVENT on depoliticizing young people and restricting radical dissent is actually counterproductive because it strengthens the hands of those who say democracy is pointless. 7. The underlying assumption of the PREVENT program is that the government needs to combat extremism through a battle of ideas which aims at isolating mainstream Muslims from a global insurgency. A form of ideological campaigning for British values and moderate Islam has come to be seen as a matter of national security. Notions of multiculturalism are seen as a threat to this campaign. But such a campaign ends up constructing a false image of Britain's Muslim citizens. Recommendations. Extremism is a vague concept that is easily exploited to demonize anyone whose opinions are radically different. The real issue is support for, or use of, illegitimate violence to achieve political ends. As a first step, there needs to be a recognition that this is a problem across all communities and takes many forms, including white racist violence. Teachers and social, youth and cultural workers must have the integrity of their professional norms protected against the expectation that they become the eyes and ears of counter-terrorist policing. To turn public services into instruments of surveillance only serves to alienate young people from institutional settings that would otherwise be well placed to give them a sense of trust and belonging. The specific needs of different communities for local services and community development should be recognized as valid in their own right and met on their own terms. Muslim citizens should not be forced into accepting a discriminatory and divisive counter-terrorist program as a condition for enjoying their rights to access basic services. The focus of prevent work on all areas with significant numbers of Muslims is discriminatory and counterproductive. Instead, central government funding should be available to any local area which, through a genuine process of local decision-making, independently identifies a need to win individuals away from support for illegitimate political violence. The minutes of all decision-making meetings in the local authority, local strategic partnership or prevent board should be published along with exact details of what has been funded, which organizations are carrying out the work, what funds they have been allocated and how it will be evaluated. The government should refrain from any attempt to promote particular interpretations of Islam. The interpretation of Islam is a matter for Muslims themselves, and the government should not promote particular sectarian or theological interests over any other through targeted capacity building. The government should be open to other interpretations of violence which emphasize its political rather than religious dimensions. Solutions aimed at young people will be most effective and fair if young people are empowered to engage politically and contribute to society, not made to feel that their opinions have to meet with official approval. The creation of spaces for genuinely open discussion about difficult political issues is crucial. The impact of racism, Islamophobia, social exclusion, and everyday violence on the well-being of young people is recognized. The terrors that young people experience in their everyday lives involve bullying, taunting, victimization and harassment from peers at school, local gangs, police, the media and, in some cases, members of their own families. The police are kept separate from empowerment work with young people. There should be no obligations on teachers and youth workers to share information with the police, beyond the basic requirements of child protection and prevention of specific criminal acts. 8. 2. Introduction. The government describes its preventing violent extremism program, hereafter prevent, as a community-led approach to tackling violent extremism. 1. It believes that by selectively directing resources at moderate Muslim organizations to carry out community development and anti-radicalization work, it can empower them to unite around shared British values to isolate the extremists. With hundreds of millions of pounds of funding, the Prevent programme has come to redefine the relationship between government and around 2 million British citizens who are Muslim. Their hearts and minds are now the target of an elaborate structure of surveillance, mapping, engagement and propaganda. Prevent has become, in effect, the government's Islam policy. So far, public discussion of Prevent has focused on the question of whether the program is too soft on non-violent extremists, who are said to clandestinely benefit from the funding stream, and the question of value for money, whether the money is being wasted on feel-good projects which do little to actually prevent violent extremism. Our research set out to address those questions but also to ask, what is the general impact of Prevent funding at community level? What, in practice, is the definition of extremism in Prevent-funded projects? Does Prevent funding foster cohesion across communities or exacerbate intercommunal conflicts and divisions? How do Prevent programs interact with local democracy? How does the Prevent program view Muslim communities, and whether the Prevent program involves non-police agencies in intelligence gathering? Our research focused on local authorities in England that have received Prevent funding and voluntary sector organisations in those areas. We carried out 32 interviews with Prevent program workers and managers in local authorities, members of local Prevent boards, voluntary sector workers engaged in Prevent work and community workers familiar with local Prevent work. We also organised a roundtable discussion in Bradford to explore the issues raised in the interviews in more detail and submitted Freedom of Information requests to local authorities. What we found was that there are strong reasons for thinking that the PREVENT program, in effect, constructs the Muslim population as a suspect community, fosters social divisions among Muslims themselves and between Muslims and others, encourages tokenism, facilitates violations of privacy and professional norms of confidentiality, discourages local democracy and is counterproductive in reducing the risk of political violence. Moreover, there is evidence that the PREVENT program has been used to establish one of the most elaborate system of surveillance ever seen in Britain. We also examined the general framework of the PREVENT program and found the underlying assumptions of a hearts and minds approach to be themselves problematic. These concerns have been largely ignored in the published literature, with the important exception of the An-Nisa Society's PREVENT, a response from the Muslim Community Report of February 2009. 3. Yet, as a result of these concerns with PREVENT, for the first time in 20 years there is a significant trend of voluntary sector organizations refusing local authority funding on the grounds of principled objections. PREVENT has come to be perceived as an integral part of an authoritarian counter-terrorist system that violates the human rights of Muslims through disproportionate arrests. Less than a seventh of those arrested under anti-terrorist legislation since 9/11 have gone on to be convicted. 4. Through the control order regime. 5. And the emerging evidence that the UK intelligence services have been operating a secret interrogation policy which facilitated the torture of British citizens by foreign agencies. 6. If the objective of PREVENT is to win the trust of Muslims in Britain, its failure cannot be overstated. It goes without saying that there is a real and ongoing risk of terrorism within Britain. It is not the purpose of this report to downplay the seriousness of that danger or the difficulties involved in intercepting potential acts of violence. These difficulties notwithstanding, it remains vital to apply democratic and human rights standards to counter-terrorism programs, not least because, in the long term, this is an essential precondition of ensuring community support. This report is therefore part of the essential project of researching, discussing and campaigning on the role of the police and security services in counterterrorism, a project which should not shy away from taking a critical stand for fear of giving succor to extremists. The stated aim of the government's counter-terrorist strategy is to enable people to go about their lives freely and with confidence. 7. The question we pose here is whether freedom and confidence for the majority can be enabled by imposing a lack of freedom and confidence on a minority, in this case, the Muslim population of Britain. 9. This report is the result of a 6-month research project funded by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. The research draws on existing policy and academic work, freedom of information requests, a program of interviews and a roundtable discussion. During the course of the project, 32 interviews were conducted with PREVENT program workers and managers in local authorities, 6 members of local PREVENT boards, 10 voluntary sector workers engaged in PREVENT work, 10, and community workers familiar with local PREVENT work, 6. Half of these interviews were conducted face-to-face, with the rest done by telephone. Respondents were guaranteed confidentiality in order to encourage a frank expression of views. In selecting interviewees, we were interested in speaking to people with experience and knowledge of PREVENT projects, rather than established community leaders. All except VE of the interviewees were Muslim. Half were women. Among those interviewed, there were a range of perspectives on PREVENT, from those who were refusing to work on PREVENT projects as a matter of principle, to those who were engaged in PREVENT projects but with significant concerns, to those who were reasonably positive about the way the PREVENT program had been designed and implemented. The interviewees were spread across the following towns, cities, and areas of England: Birmingham, Bradford, Brent, Eneld, Islington, Leicester, Newcastle, Oldham, Preston, Reading, Rochdale, Walsall, Wakefield, Wellingborough, and Wickham. In July, a roundtable discussion event with 24 participants was held in Bradford to explore in more detail some of the issues that had been raised in the interviews. As a result of the haze of confusion surrounding the PREVENT program, conspiracy theories and speculative rumors tend to circulate, especially among communities in the areas that PREVENT has focused on. Such an atmosphere is disempowering and we do not wish to add to it. We have attempted to conduct this research in an evidence-based manner, providing sources for the claims made wherever possible. On occasion, information has been passed to us by individuals who, for understandable reasons, wish to remain anonymous. The credibility of the information will therefore be harder for the reader to assess, but we have, as far as possible, only reproduced such claims where they can be confirmed by other sources. We hope that other individuals and organizations will, along with ourselves, continue the investigative work begun in this research project so that the PREVENT program will be subject to a much greater degree of critical scrutiny and be required to become more transparent in its operations. 10. For the PREVENT program. The PREVENT program, with a budget in 2008/9 of £140 million, is a part of the government's counter-terrorist strategy which focuses on mobilizing communities to oppose the ideology of violent extremism. Despite the government's claim that it is communities-led, the allocation of PREVENT funding to local authorities has not been driven by a decision-making process in which local agencies identify their own needs and access central government funds accordingly. Rather, local authorities have been pressured to adopt PREVENT in direct proportion to the numbers of Muslims in the area, thereby constructing the Muslim population as a suspect community. Local authorities have used PREVENT funding, in its early stages, to carry out targeted capacity building of Muslim communities, focusing particularly on young people, women, and mosques. But serious problems arise when deprived communities with many needs consider that their voluntary sector organizations can only access the resources to meet these needs if they are willing to sign up to a counterterrorism agenda. With the revised counterterrorist strategy published in March 2009, the focus of PREVENT widened to promoting shared values as well as opposing violent extremism. In 2004, the government launched what the Times described as one of the most ambitious government social engineering projects in recent years. Alongside the legislative and policing aspects of Britain's domestic counter-terrorism program, it was decided there should be an attempt to win over the hearts and minds of young Muslims in Britain away from the extremist narrative. The aim was to reduce the circulation of extremist ideas and tackle the widespread discontent and disaffection which extremists were thought to exploit. This was to be achieved by strengthening the hand of moderate Muslim leaders through government contact and targeted capacity building. As a senior civil servant explained, "We did the same in Northern Ireland in the 1980s when, as well as deploying police and troops on the streets, we had a massive program of investment in the local community, raising living standards. We also set about bridge building with the Catholic community." 8. The fact that the 7/7 bombings in London were carried out by homegrown terrorists increased the prominence of this broadly hearts and minds approach. The Preventing Extremism Together Task Force, which was initiated by the government in the wake of 7/7 and was made up of a relatively wide cross-section of Muslim community representatives, made 64 recommendations in its November 2005 report, including a demand for a public inquiry into the 7/7 attacks. Its key argument was that ultimately the solution to extremism lay in tackling a series of issues that affected Muslim communities: inequality, discrimination, deprivation, and foreign policy. In April 2007, the government launched its PREVENT program, with the Department for Communities and Local Government, DCLG, publishing Preventing Violent Extremism, Winning Hearts and Minds, which set out a community-led approach to tackling violent extremism. 9. The ideas RST'd 3 years earlier had by now evolved into a new strategy summed up in the dictum that communities defeat terrorism. Counter-terrorism's hard side of emergency police powers needed, it was said, to be complemented with the soft side of community engagement, and this meant a series of initiatives at the local level, involving both the voluntary and statutory sectors. The overall counter-terrorist strategy known as Contest was thus made up of a series of distinct strands. Pursue stopping terrorist attacks through detection, investigation, prosecution, and other sanctions. Protect protection of infrastructure, crowded places, the transport system and border controls. Prepare mitigating the impact of attacks through strengthening the response of the emergency services, and so on. Prevent stopping people becoming terrorists or supporting violent extremism. 10. However, the form which the PREVENT program's community engagement was to take turned out to be quite different from what the Preventing Extremism Together Task Force of 2005 had anticipated. The government's advice to local authorities involved in the PREVENT program stated that preventing violent extremism in the name of Islam must, first and foremost, be about winning the struggle for hearts and minds. Winning hearts and minds will take significant efforts by Muslim communities to tackle the pernicious ideology being spread by a small minority of extremists, and will mean local Muslim communities taking a leadership stance against sophisticated campaigning and extremist messages. Our aim is to support that through targeted capacity building. 11. This suggested that the focus of PREVENT would not be on inequality, discrimination, and deprivation but on an ideological campaign that selected Muslim organizations would be empowered to carry out on behalf of the government. Also in early 2007, a new department within the Home Office, the Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism, OSCT, was formed, with the aim of setting the general parameters of the UK's contest counter-terrorism strategy, within which the police, the intelligence services and other agencies would operate. The creation of the OSCT was designed to overcome departmental boundaries and encourage cross-government working on counter-terrorism. In May 2007, the administration of a number of matters related to the criminal justice system was removed from the Home Office to the new Ministry of Justice, freeing the Home Office itself to make counter-terrorism a higher priority. Charles Farr, said to be a former senior diplomat, was seconded from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in July 2007 to head the OSCT with a staff of 100 civil servants that was expected to increase to over 200 within a couple of years. 12 later that year, the OSCT deemed the objectives of the PREVENT strategy as challenging the violent extremist ideology and supporting mainstream voices, disrupting those who promote violent extremism and supporting the institutions where they may be active, supporting individuals who are being targeted and recruited to the cause of violent extremism, increasing the resilience of communities to violent extremism, and addressing the grievances that ideologues are exploiting. These objectives were to be supported by two cross-cutting streams which were key enabling functions in delivering the strategy: developing understanding, analysis, and information, and strategic communications. 13. The design of the strategy rested centrally on the notion that the work of countering violent extremist ideology would rarely be done directly by government but rather by Muslim communities themselves, supported in this work through targeting capacity building. 14. Embedding this ideological campaign within communities themselves would, it was hoped, provide for a far more effective rejection of the ideology of violent extremism and isolation of the apologists for terrorism. 15. In 2007, the Preventing Violent Extremism Passenger Fund, PVEP, was established by the DCLG with a modest £6 million budget to support 70 priority local authorities in England in meeting these objectives. The DCLG also distributed £650,000 to 19 organisations through a Community Leadership Fund, CLF, which was designed to enable local and national organisations to complement the work being undertaken by local authorities. In April 2008, the amount of money being spent on PREVENT increased significantly. The PVEP money distributed by the DCLG to 70 local authorities developed into a 3-year £45 million area-based grant which, by 2010, will be distributed among 94 local authorities. 16. An increase to this budget of £7.5 million was announced in August 2009. 17. A further £5.1 million is being distributed over the same 3-year period through the CLF strand. 18. Along with other smaller funding streams, this means that the total money spent on PREVENT by the DCLG from April 2007-11 is likely to be £80 million. It is expected that, by April 2011, over £61.7 million will have been provided to local authorities for PREVENT work. 19. As well as the DCLG, other government departments are also funding PREVENT work. In 2009-10, the Home Office OSCT is providing £5.6 million of direct funding to the National Offender Management System to operate a counter-extremism program. With offenders, and the Youth Justice Board is getting £3.5 million to deliver local prevent work through youth offending teams. The OSCT also directly funds a number of its own projects on intervention with at-risk individuals. Its Prevent Central unit has funding for 2009/10 of £8.5 million. 20 police forces have also received a large amount of funding to carry out prevent work. As part of their Prevent Delivery Plan, which was launched in 2008, they have recruited 300 new staff across 24 forces to work alongside the national and regional counterterrorism policing structure and with neighbourhood policing teams. 21 They have also received £1.2 million from the Home Office to coordinate their work with schools, colleges, and universities. 22 The Department for Children, Schools, and Families and the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills also have funding available to support their prevent work in educational institutions. 23 Likewise, the Department for Culture, Media, and Sport is engaged in its own prevent work. Finally, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has a substantial prevent program with funding of £400 million over 2008-2010, see Box 1. Across all of these departments, the total prevent budget in 2008/9 was over £140 million. 24 In March 2009, it was anticipated that by 2011 the total prevent budget would have increased by a further £100 million. 25. The Prevent Program and local authorities. The focus of this report is the involvement in the Prevent Program of local authorities and voluntary sector organisations in England. Of particular interest, therefore, is the £51 million which will have been delivered by 2011 as DCLG area-based grants to local authorities. Examining the government's allocation of prevent funding through these grants might be expected to reveal which areas in England are considered to be at risk of radicalisation. A correlation of the local authority areas which have received prevent funding against the 2001 census shows that, in fact, every area with more than 2,000 Muslims has been allocated funding through DCLG area-based grants. Figure 1 shows the 19 local authorities which are receiving the largest amount of funding from 2008/9 to 2010/11 along with the 19 local authority areas with the largest numbers of Muslims according to the 2001 census. Figure 3 plots the amount allocated for every local authority area in England that received funding against the population of Muslims in that area according to the 2001 census. There is a strong correlation between the amount of prevent funding provided and the number of Muslims in that area. This indicates that DCLG prevent funding has not been allocated to areas according to identifiable risks of violent extremism but in direct proportion to the numbers of Muslims in an area. Moreover, it implies that the allocation of prevent funding has not been driven by a decision-making process in which local agencies identify their own needs and access central government funds accordingly. Rather, the more Muslims in an area, the more DCLG prevent money it has had, irrespective of any other factors. The underlying assumption seems to be that the Muslim population as a whole. In addition, the FCO has paid £520,000 to an organisation called Deen International, headed by Khurshid Ahmed, the chair of the British Muslim Forum, to produce a public relations campaign in Pakistan. 29 The campaign, entitled I Am the West, involves television commercials featuring prominent British Muslims. 30. Fig 1, areas in England with most Muslims and most funding. 19 areas in England with the most Muslims according to the 2001 census. Birmingham £2,413,000. Bradford £1,425,000. Tower Hamlets £1,349,000. Newham £1,197,000. Kirklees £893,000. Manchester £817,000. Waltham Forest £817,000. Brent £741,000. Ealing £741,000. Leicester £741,000. Redbridge £741,000. Hackney £741,000. Luton £665,000. Blackburn with Darwin £665,000. Enfield £665,000. Haringey £665,000. Oldham £665,000. Sheffield £665,000. Camden £665,000. Birmingham £140,033. Bradford £75,188. Tower Hamlets £71,389. Newham £59,293. Kirklees £39,312. Manchester £35,806. Waltham Forest £32,902. Brent £32,290. Ealing £31,033. Leicester £30,885. Redbridge £28,487. Hackney £27,908. Luton £26,963. Blackburn with Darwin £26,674. Enfield £26,306. Haringey £24,371. Oldham £24,039. Sheffield £23,819. Camden £22,906. 19 areas in England with the largest Prevent DCLG area-based grants 2008/9 2010/11. Needs to be targeted in relation to violent extremism. Rather than specific groups or localities, and irrespective of the views of local stakeholders. The head of OSCT, Charles Farr, has given his own account of how the Prevent program conceives of its target population. There is a group of people that have been radicalized and are committed to violent extremism, and the only solution to that group of people in this country is criminal investigation and prosecution. There is a much larger group of people who feel a degree of negativity, if not hostility, towards the state, the country, the community, and who are, as it were, the pool in which terrorists will swim, and to a degree they will be complicit with and will certainly not report on activity which they detect on their doorstep. We have to reach that group, because unless we reach that group they may themselves move into the very sharp end, but even if they do not, they will create an environment in which terrorists can operate with a degree of impunity that we do not want. That is to a degree what Prevent is all about. 31. Combining these comments with what we know about the distribution of DCLG fund. It seems that the Prevent program is interested in 3 population groups, which can be conceived of as making up a layered pyramid, of a kind commonly seen in counter-terrorist literature. See Figure 2. The top layer of the pyramid corresponds to those actively engaged in preparing or supporting violent extremism. The middle layer is a much larger group of people who are extremist sympathizers. The lowest layer of the pyramid corresponds to the entire population of Muslims. As one moves from the top of the pyramid to the bottom, the focus shifts from the pursue strand of detection, investigation, arrest, detention, prosecution, control orders, and so on, to the Prevent strand, which is focused on direct interventions with those in the middle layer and on winning over the hearts and minds of those in the bottom layer to actively identify and challenge those in the middle and top layers. This explains why the Hearts and Minds programs that the DCLG is funding local authorities to carry out are targeted at all areas with a Muslim population of over 2,000 persons. The problem with attempting to mobilize all these Muslims against extremism is that it, in effect, constructs Muslims into a suspect community, in which the failure of Muslim individuals or organizations to comply with this mobilization makes them suspect in the eyes of the counter-terrorist system and shifts them from the pyramid's bottom layer of mainstream Muslims to the middle layer of extremists. 32. However, Muslims may want to avoid participating in the government's Prevent program for a number of reasons which have nothing to do with support for political violence. The Prevent program is, as shown in Chapter 6, integrated with a policing agenda which makes the allocation of the program to every area with more than 2,000 Muslims amount to a form of proling that is inconsistent with commitments to racial and religious equality. In theory, the decision to adopt the DCLG's Prevent program in a particular area is supposed to be taken by the Local Strategic Partnership, LSP, a forum led by the local authority in which representatives of local stakeholders likely to include the police, business, and the voluntary and community sectors come together to discuss, plan and coordinate work. The DCLG's Prevent grants are generally administered by the Equalities, Diversity, or Social Inclusion departments in local authorities, which will then draw in a range of local partners across the voluntary and statutory sectors to carry out the Prevent work. A framework known as the Local Area Agreement, law, and national indicator set provides central government with a mechanism by which it can steer how Prevent funds are used locally. Laws are action plans that set out what improvements central government expects LSBs to make in an area over a 3-year period. Laws contain up to 30 targets drawn from a national indicator set of 188 indicators on various social problems, one of which is related to preventing violent extremism and is known as NI35. For each indicator that an LSP adopts, a target must be agreed. Meeting law targets leads to rewards for the local authority in the form of additional central government funding which is not tied to the meeting of targets. Moreover, all local authorities are required to report publicly against all 188 indicators, regardless of whether or not they are included in its law. NI35 therefore dictates how Prevent money will be used by LSBs even if it is not designated as a target in the law. Laws became statutory in 2007 across all local authority areas in England. There is also a statutory duty to involve local people in the decision-making process of setting the priorities. In theory, the priorities and targets in the law should reach the concerns and aspirations of local people, as expressed through the LSP. Thereafter, a further negotiation is supposed to take place between the LSP and the Government Office for the region. Progress on NI35, the National Indicator on Building Communities Resilient to Violent Extremism, is assessed and scored on 4 factors, listed in the left column of Figure 4. For each of these, maximum points is obtained by achieving the description in the right column. As of May 2009, the areas which have adopted NI35 as a designated target in their laws are Calderdale, Derby, Leicester, Birmingham, Dudley, Peterborough, Barnet, Haringey, Harrow, Hounslow, Lambeth, Redbridge Tower Hamlets, Westminster, Buckinghamshire, Reading, Slough, and Gloucestershire. 33. A number of our interviewees argued that, contrary to the rhetoric of its being community-led, the DCLG's Prevent program has, in practice, been driven by central government rather than by locally perceived needs. This observation is consistent with the ending that there is a strong correlation between the level of DCLG Prevent funding and the numbers of Muslims in a particular area. Many interviewees spoke of the problems with central government pressuring local areas to adopt the Prevent program in this way. The manager of a community organisation in the north of England who sat on an law board said that, in practice, the decision-making process takes place behind closed doors, with representation from black and minority ethnic communities marginalized. The introduction of Prevent was never properly discussed. The chief executives of the local authority drove it through, which means that the usual processes of consultation and accountability were bypassed. It was presented as a fait accompli when this person raised her concerns about the process. She was sidelined. An underdeveloped and vulnerable voluntary sector is easily pressured into uncritically accepting government programs, she says. And many black and minority ethnic organizations have bought into the Prevent agenda. Due to the need for sheer survival, the sector has been forced to make these compromises. 35. A local authority worker in another part of the north told us that the voluntary sector has not been consulted and does not have the resources or experience to respond to these issues. 36. Another worker in the north said when the Prevent agenda RST started, people asked why this city was being targeted. Basically, it was not seen as a local issue but an issue put on the agenda by national government. I spoke to a city council official working in community cohesion and he told me we didn't have a choice. We were just told that we had to do work on Prevent. We don't want to make a problem around this. We have the money and we should use it. 37. In one area of London, a youth service manager working on a Prevent funded project told us that the grassroots are not consulted and that local authorities and councillors are too scared to criticise central government even if they disagree with it. 38. Among interviewees, there was a widespread feeling that the NI-35 and law assessment framework was a means of influencing local communities to adopt the PREVENT program over other priorities. A member of an LSP in the Midlands was concerned about the whole decision-making process in relation to PREVENT. Were local authority chief executives pressurized by central government to go for PREVENT, against the needs of local communities? Who actually agrees laws? Who is represented in them? In effect, they are dictated by central government. It all seemed unreal and random. What were the postcodes that were a self-sustaining, dynamic and community-driven engagement which takes place on a number of different levels and in a number of different ways, with innovative approaches to communication and engagement of all groups. Sophisticated understanding of local Muslim communities is used to drive policy development and engagement. Strong understanding of the PREVENT objectives and the drivers of violent extremism, as well as of the interfaces with related policy areas. Full use of local, national, and international research, guidance and expertise on the agenda, including good information sharing between partners. Good understanding of local circumstances and drivers. Risk-based and strategically focused action plan with strong links to the knowledge and understanding of the drivers of violent extremism, the PREVENT strategy and to extensive consultation with communities and local partner agencies. Agenda effectively mainstreamed through consideration of existing service delivery and policies, alongside the development of specific actions, projects, and capabilities. Awareness of agenda throughout partner organizations. Full range of activities across all strands of the PREVENT strategy. Innovative actions, projects, and capabilities clearly identified. Strong evidence of multi-agency approach to deliver across a broad range of partners and agencies, including synergies with crime and disorder reduction partnerships and other bodies. Strong tried and tested monitoring mechanisms which allow highlighting and resolution of issues, track progress, and ensure consistent delivery of projects and actions within timescale, to the required standard and budget constraints. Oversight group with appropriate skills and seniority in place and actively involved in monitoring. Professional and extensive evaluation of project against agreed objectives, which has real impact on development of future projects. Strong audit arrangements and sophisticated risk management in place. 34. Understanding of, and engagement with, Muslim communities. Knowledge and understanding of the drivers and causes of violent extremism and the PREVENT objectives. Development of a risk-based preventing violent extremism action plan, in support of delivery of the PREVENT objectives. Effective oversight, delivery, and evaluation of projects and actions. Supposed to be at risk? Since we weren't being told what the problem was, how could we know the solution? 39. According to a local authority manager in the Midlands, there is strong pressure on the local authority to sign up to PREVENT. They didn't adopt NI-35 but they still have to report on it. So it is frustrating to them when individuals raise criticisms and hold the agenda back. The government office and the police are driving the agenda and putting a lot of pressure on us, but the local authority, which is generally made up of tick-box people, has no competency to deal with it. We have no information from the police as to whether there is actually a problem of extremism in this area. I want to do evidence-based work on the underlying issues of housing, drug dealing, and so on, all the issues that lead to Muslims being an underclass. I also want to widen it to the far right. But as soon as I say something critical about PREVENT, I get called by management, police, or a representative from the government office. There's scaremongering if you raise questions. They say when something does happen, implying you're the one who's going to be responsible. 40. One local authority worker in the north noted that NI-35 is problematic in that it restricts the focus to extremism in Muslim communities. 41. Another wondered why a national indicator has never been established for achieving racial equality. 42. Apart from local authorities, other agencies have also experienced government pressure to become involved with PREVENT and focus on areas in England deemed as high risk but which are actually no more than areas with significant numbers of Muslims. A 2007 communication from a government department to an arm's-length body requested its engagement in PREVENT and identified as targets the areas of highest Muslim population, a rough and ready proxy for risk of radicalization. Because of the way in which local authorities have been pressured to adopt Prevent, there is often a serious lack of transparency in the decision-making process and in the nature of the services provided. A member of a local Prevent board told us that early on, there were a lot of questions being asked about funding, who was getting it, what it was for. There was a lack of transparency. Reforms were promised to make the process more open, but key individuals still run the project as if it's their money. 43. A local authority worker in the Midlands found it hard to end out what national government is funding locally. 44. And someone involved in Prevent decision-making in the Midlands told us funding decisions have already been made and potential partners agreed in advance. 45. This was a concern shared by many other interviewees. Workers on Prevent projects often felt unsure as to what they were really getting involved in. One manager of a Prevent-funded youth project in London told us that as workers, we do not get told what Prevent is really about. 46. To varying degrees, we also found that workers on Prevent projects were reluctant to inform the people they worked with of the nature of their funding. The manager of a youth project in the north told us the work we do would be discredited, doors would be shut in our face, if people knew that we were Prevent funded. If asked, we make no secret of it, but we don't mention it otherwise, as people will then misinterpret what our intentions are. 47. Another youth project manager said a lot of people are having to hide the Prevent name because of perceptions of young people. We kept it hidden for some time. In the Midlands, we were told that with a lot of projects, young people don't know where the money's coming from. It's often difficult to know if it's Prevent. 48. Community development and counter-terrorism. How has the Prevent money been used in practice? Broadly, we have identified the following categories of work: targeted capacity building of Muslim communities, police community engagement, channel program and other direct de-radicalization interventions, supporting counter-terrorism in institutional settings such as schools, colleges, universities, and prisons, communication campaigns with domestic and overseas audiences. The last four of these categories will be examined at various points in other parts of this report. But it is the RST targeted capacity building that has been the main use of the DCLG's Prevent grants to local authorities and is the focus of the rest of this section. A number of interviewees believed that a large part of what local authorities actually do with Prevent money is community cohesion and community development work. In some cases, there is a perception that this has happened because local authorities have not really been competent to carry out projects that involve directly challenging extremists and so, by default, have fallen back on what they know about community development. A local authority worker in the north of England told us that this was happening in his area, with the council feeling that if it was going to be forced to take on the Prevent program, it might as well take the money in order to do community cohesion and social cohesion work. 49. What generally seems to have happened is that the money has been used to support straightforward community work with Muslim women, young people, and imams. According to government guidance issued to local partners in 2008, Muslim women and young people are key constituencies to recruit as part of Prevent work. Women can be a particularly effective voice as they are at the heart not only of their communities but also of their families. While peer-to-peer conversations between young people are often an effective means of communication. 50. The manager of a youth work project in the north of England told us that all of the Prevent projects he had seen were bread and butter youth training, community engagement, consultancy work, or advocacy work. He noted that if you take the Muslim focus out of it, this is all straight out of a community development book. 51. For example, Newcastle has received £437,000 from the DCLG over 3 years to do Prevent work. It has used the money on awareness training sessions on Islam and to produce a DVD resource for schools on Islamophobia, among other work. NLD has received £310,000 from DCLG over 2 years. The major projects it has commissioned are a mentoring scheme in schools, £156,606, youth training and engagement, £130,000, English language teaching and lectures at the Jalali Jam Mosque, £54,557, support for the Edmonton Islamic Centre, £40,000, interfaith workshops run by Faith Matters, £30,074, the Shoot a Ball Not a Gun basketball project, £25,983, a program empowering women against extremism and a multi-faith workshop run by the Bangladesh Welfare Association of NLD. £23,531, the Edmonton Eagles Boxing Club, £16,340, mosque improvements and an intergenerational project run by the Muslim Cultural Society of NLD, £12,000, an NLD Speaks LM project, £12,000, and a mentoring scheme run by Somali Young People Against Crime, £10,000, 52. Wakefield spent its £90,000 PVEP money on women's empowerment, youth work, developing mosque governance and a DVD project on celebrating diversity in schools. 53. Its prevent work continues with football, cricket and music events designed to bring young people together, information sessions for young people on Islam and a theatre project on extremism. Islington, which has been allocated £513,000 from the DCLG over 3 years, has, among other work, funded training for imams, youth work with Muslims who have been in prison, youth work with the Somali community and outreach work through an Arab community organization. Walsall has also been allocated £513,000 from the DCLG over 3 years. Its action plan includes imam training, capacity building for mosques, a drama program for young people to discuss extremism, and training for local authority workers on Islam and cultural awareness. 54. Dudley Council has passed £277,000, which amounts to all of its current DCLG prevent funding with the exception of £27,000 to cover commissioning costs, to the British Muslim Forum, BMF. The BMF is a national Muslim organisation chaired by Khurshid Ahmed, a Labour councillor in Dudley and chair of the LSP. The BMF is, in turn, commissioning a number of prevent projects locally. 55. The BMF has also received £48,023 to work with mosques in Sandwell and Wolverhampton. This has involved training 36 imams on Britishness through fact-tending missions to the British Museum and Whitehall. 56. As one local authority manager in London noted 3 years earlier, this work would have been funded as community cohesion. However, the target is now solely Muslims. 57. A voluntary sector worker in the Midlands told us a lot of prevent projects are just recreational activities that don't change anyone's views on anything. 58. On the other hand, a youth worker in the North thought that people are more and more burying their true feelings on issues like Afghanistan and Iraq. We need to be able to reach these people and educate them. Sport is a good way of doing this. 59. Another in the same city said what we are getting is touchy-feely community cohesion projects. They merely give the illusion that some kind of work is going on to prevent violent extremism. 60. Someone involved in Prevent in the Midlands told us you could argue any project could be to do with preventing violent extremism, including local leisure activities. 61. A point made by a number of people in the voluntary sector was that important work was becoming increasingly reliant on prevent funding, despite counterterrorism being an inappropriate label to attach to it. The manager of a youth work project in the North told us that previously his organization used to be funded through charitable trusts, but we were forced to use prevent money, even though we didn't want to, when other sources dried up. As youth workers, we believe in soft outcomes, such as empowerment. Rather than something like preventing extremism. We would prefer to fund this work through charitable trust funding rather than prevent. 62. The manager of a women's project in the Midlands said all the doors to obtaining funding for work with Muslim women were shutting and all the signposts were pointing to prevent. 63. What of the areas that are considered key targets for the prevent program? Bradford, which has not designated NI35 as a target, has been allocated £1.425 million over 3 years by the DCLG Prevent program. Its key projects include the Future Leaders project based at the Islamic Cultural and Educational Association at Madna Jamia Masjid, which is training 500 young people on leadership skills, and work with the Bradford Council of Mosques to build the capacity of imams, increase safety in buildings and engage in interfaith work. Local authority managers in Bradford consider the Prevent tag an unfortunate label and prefer to see their approach as based on engaging communities to build capacity and cohesion. 64. In Tower Hamlets, which has designated NI35 as a target and has a £1.3 million Prevent budget from DCLG over 3 years, 28 projects have been selected for funding. The ones with the largest sums are work with Somali ex-offenders and community leaders run by the Ocean Somali Community Association. Tower Hamlets Somali Organization. Network in Al Huda Mosque, £100,000, Detached Youth Work with the Brick Lane Youth Development Agency, £95,000, Interfaith and Empowerment Work with the Council of Mosques, £75,000, Schools Work run by Ibrahim College, £60,000, Development of an Internet-based deradicalization program by Bold Creative, £60,000, and Building Capacity of Muslim Families to Resist Violent Extremism, £50,000. 65. Lastly, in Birmingham, which is the largest recipient of Prevent money and has also designated NI35 as a target, work has been undertaken across VE key themes: reclaiming Islam, media, women, young people, and cross-cutting projects. The £525,000 Birmingham received through the PVEP was used to fund 11 mosque projects on young people, women, the media, teaching imams English and developing management structures in mosques, as well as funding criminal records checks on all staff at madrasas. The £2.4 million, which Birmingham has been allocated from DCLG over 2008/9-2010/11, is being used for 10 new projects, including extending the governance work with a further 30 mosques, incorporating citizenship studies as part of the curriculum in madrasas, youth inclusion work, media workshops, a Muslim women's forum, mentoring with young people, youth work with Somalis, and an archives and heritage project which seeks to inform young Muslims about the intertwining of British and Muslim history. 66. Finally, money has been allocated directly from the DCLG to voluntary sector organisations rather than via local authorities. In 2008/9, £8.5 million was provided in this form, of which the largest part was the Community Leadership Fund, CLF. 67. The RST round of CLF money, amounting to £650,000, was distributed to 19 organisations in 2007/8. The largest beneficiaries were the British Muslim Forum, £150,000 to improve governance in mosques and capacity building, Common Purpose, £65,000 for training young leaders, and the Sub Muslim Council, £53,000 for training imams and capacity building. The following year, the CLF budget increased to £5.1 million over 3 years. 32 projects were funded nationally to complement the work being funded through local authorities. The projects were in VE categories: building capacity of Muslim organizations and communities, supporting Muslim young people, supporting Muslim women, building capacity of Muslim religious leaders, and supporting local forums against extremism and Islamophobia. Major beneficiaries in 2008/9 were again the Sub Muslim Council, £150,000, the British Muslim Forum, £125,000, and Common Purpose, £65,000. 68. As well as encouraging local work with Muslim young people and women, the DCLG has also established 2 national groups of representatives of these categories. Launched in October 2008, the Young Muslims Advisory Group is made up of 23 Muslims aged 16-25 from across the UK. It held a national youth conference in March 2009. 69. The National Muslim Women's Advisory Group was launched in January 2008 as a group of 19 women to act as ambassadors for Muslim women at grassroots and represent their views and concerns to government. 70. It works on issues of civic participation, theological understanding, and the identification of role models. The manager of a Muslim women's organization told us that the government is creating a tier of representatives through organizations such as these because it wants to be seen to do something. But it's all a smokescreen to distract from the underlying political issues that cause extremism. 71. The manager of another Muslim women's organization who is a member of the National Muslim Women's Advisory Group said, "When I started, no one wanted to know about Muslim women. Now, there is nearly all this investment. Yet despite the money being available, it is being wasted on work that isn't going anywhere. There is no doubt that the need for community development among Muslim populations is great. But there are serious problems when deprived communities with many needs end that their voluntary sector organizations believe that they can only access the resources to meet these needs if they are willing to sign up to a counterterrorism agenda. This is particularly so when that agenda brings with it an element of surveillance, a problem we shall examine in Chapter 6. As one interviewee noted, it is counterproductive for the government to relate to Muslims only through a counterterrorism label rather than as citizens through mainstream policies. 73. Another noted that community development and counterterrorism are fundamentally different and have different objectives. 74. Moreover, if organizations are forced to accept prevent money to survive, in spite of the concerns of the communities they work with, then there is a danger of the whole exercise being undermined. The manager of a prevent-funded youth work project in London told us, "Engaging young people is great, but they are very critical of the government, so winning their hearts and minds is contradictory. I am ashamed to say where the money is coming from. I get questions from young people about why it's called preventing violent extremism. The government is investing money in trying to get trust, but young people don't trust the government. They expect that they will be stopped at airports. Investing money in communities appears contradictory if you don't listen. Workers themselves are becoming disillusioned. It makes us feel like hypocrites." 75. In March 2009, the government published a revised counterterrorism strategy, written by the OSCT, known as Contest 2. The new strategy signaled a commitment to a much more overt campaign of challenging not just violent extremism but extremism in general. This was a response to two public criticisms which had been made of the PREVENT program as it had been implemented to date, RST, that the criteria determining who was entitled to access funding were too loose so that groups which were extremist but not engaged in criminal violence could get funding. Second, that much of the work being funded was of little relevance to actually reducing the risk of extremism and that there needed to be more of an emphasis on direct challenges to extremist ideas rather than general community development work. As a result of these criticisms, the government was able to be more explicit in stating exactly what it wanted the PREVENT program to do. Thus the key shift in Contest 2 is the government's attempt to lead British society in overtly challenging views which fall short of supporting violence and are within the law, but which reject and undermine our shared values and jeopardize community cohesion. 76. The Contest 2 program claims to have no intention of outlawing these views or criminalizing those who hold them. 77. Instead, it wants these views to be actively opposed by non-government agencies, particularly Muslim organizations, so that the ideology which sustains terrorism will be subject to greater challenge in and by communities in this country, notably but not only by British Muslims, making it harder for terrorists to operate here and to recruit people to their cause. 78. As part of its Contest 2 strategy document, the OSCT has included a brief history of the threat to the UK from international terrorism, see Box 2. In a speech on February 25, 2009, the then Communities Minister Hazel Blears declared what the new approach to extremism would involve. Those who do not espouse violence but who do not share core values will be directly confronted, she said, because extremism was contributing to an environment which makes violence more acceptable or justable, makes individuals more susceptible to committing acts of violence. She went on to deem extremism as a belief in the supremacy of the Muslim people, in a divine duty to bring the world under the control of hegemonic Islam, in the establishment of a theocratic caliphate, and in the undemocratic imposition of theocratic law on whole societies. This ideology, she said, is rooted in a twisted reading of Islam, and challenging this ideology requires moral clarity in relating to organizations and individuals with whose views we disagree vehemently, who, for example, have unacceptable attitudes towards women, Jews, or gay and lesbian people. There is a need for a clear dividing line between what we consider acceptable, and what we consider beyond the pale. She then described a kind of sliding scale of acceptability with ministerial contact offered as a form of reward. With groups which call for or support terrorist acts there is no room whatsoever for debate, only vociferous opposition. With groups which do not call for terrorism, but which have an equivocal attitude on core values such as democracy, freedom of speech or respect towards women, there is some scope for limited engagement. An important part of any engagement will be to challenge those views that the government considers unacceptable. With other groups or coalitions, which on the whole accept core values and reject extremism, but which have some internal dissent about these principles, there is scope for broader debate in public, especially where this would encourage men and women standing up for core values, and help them carry the day inside the organization. And with those groups taking a genuine lead, ministers can make visits, share platforms, debate in public. The stronger the group's example, the stronger the case for ministerial involvement at a high level, all the way up to the Prime Minister. 86. Suggesting that there was a danger of excessive tolerance of diversity impeding this program, she said that this country is proud of its tradition of fair play and good manners, welcoming of diversity, tolerant of others. This is a great strength. But the pendulum has swung too far. 87. Another version of which views would be considered extremist was given by OSCT head Charles Farr. He spoke of views in some quarters here that Western culture is evil and that Muslims living in this country should not engage with Western cultural organizations, for want of a better term, with Western culture itself. He goes on, there is nothing violent about that and it is not necessarily going to lead to terrorism, but it does seem to me to be unreal for this or any other government not to. Box 2, A Brief History of International Terrorism. With the publication of Contest 2, the OSCT has included as part of its counter-terrorism strategy document a detailed account of the history of the threat. 79. This is the RST time that the government has decided to publish its own account of the history of international terrorism, which it traces back to 1968. The RST Modern International Terrorist Incident, this official history claims, took place when a faction of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, hijacked an Israeli commercialite from Rome. 80. The next key moment Indiana. This history is the early 1980s, when a militant Islamist ideology, initially with only a domestic agenda, emerged in Egypt and Afghanistan. 81. But this militant Islamism soon had a growing influence which was seen elsewhere, notably in the RST Intifada in the occupied territories from 1987 onwards. 82. This trajectory then leads to the formation of Al-Qaeda in the late 1980s in Afghanistan. 83. In this rendering, as some commentators have noted, a whole range of movements involving Arabs or Muslims, including an uprising by Palestinians which was dominated by secular nationalist politics, is merged together to form an idea of Islamist international terrorism. The political context to international terrorism is minimized. 84. And political violence by Muslims is implicitly taken to be a cultural problem located within Islam's failure to properly transition to modernity. 85. Say that they are going to challenge that, and that is no more nor less than what this government is now saying. 88. This point was illustrated when, on the eve of the publication of the Contest 2 strategy document, the government wrote a letter to the Muslim Council of Britain, MCB, stating that unless its Deputy General Secretary Dud Abdullah resigned, it would sever relations with the organization. 89. Abdullah had recently signed the so-called Istanbul Declaration which called for Muslims to resist the blockade of Gaza. The public rift with the MCB was a symbolic matter, it had long since fallen out of favor with government. But the government's distancing of a major Muslim organization sent a signal that, as one interviewee noted, the crunch was now coming for all sorts of organizations which had received prevent funding in the past. 90. Much of the community development work that had been funded in the past would now have to involve itself in the explicit promotion of British values and the rejection of anti-Western views. A community activist put it like this: with the Contest 2 agenda, it makes it impossible for us to continue the sort of work with young people we have been doing, for example theatre work, which is now considered too much of a softly approach. When we did a play about a young person who becomes radicalized, we had a panel event afterwards, with discussion and young people asking questions. But the Contest 2 agenda instructs people what is right or wrong in a more directive way. It tells young people you will not disagree, you will support British troops, that sort of thing. There is no room for us to let young people explore their anger in the way that they need to. With Contest 2, we can't even listen to what young people tell us as we have a duty to report it. 91. For many interviewees, a key issue was the relationship between Prevent and other policy agendas, in particular community cohesion. Community cohesion has had a number of meanings since it was introduced as a policy program following the riots in Oldham, Burnley, and Bradford in the summer of 2001. The government rhetoric with which it was associated at birth indicated that it was a declaration of the end of multiculturalism and an assertion that Asians, Muslims in particular, would have to develop a greater acceptance of the principal national institutions and assimilate to core British values. 92. At a local level, it has been associated with projects involving cross-cultural contact, interfaith dialogue, and twinning of schools, all aimed at bridging the gaps between communities and overcoming fragmentation. While government rhetoric often mistakenly presented this fragmentation as the result of an overtolerance of diversity which allowed non-white communities to self-segregate, others managed to use the language of cohesion for more progressive local projects that united across communities to address shared issues of deprivation. As we have noted, on occasion, Prevent funding has allowed some projects to continue doing work of this kind under the radar, at least in the early stages. One youth service manager told us that, for a couple of years, he was able to exploit the tension between community cohesion and Prevent to develop a Prevent-funded project that brought together Muslim and non-Muslim young people to work on democratic empowerment. However, given the Prevent program's near-exclusive focus on Muslim communities, this has proved increasingly difficult. We were lucky that we were in there from the start when parameters were not set which we could exploit. But I'm not sure how long you can continue with that. Things are becoming more rigid. It seems to be more target-driven as the local authority gets to understand more about what pressures central government can apply. There are too many issues now. 93. Someone active on a Prevent funding board in the Midlands told us that since the police have got involved, the emphasis is more on actual Prevent rather than community development and cohesion. 94. The manager of a youth project in the north observed that Prevent goes against the community cohesion and racial equality agendas because it ends up reinforcing single group contact. The main impact of Prevent is not what the government intended it to be. It is the further marginalization of the Muslim community, a re-emphasized focus on Muslims, which has changed the perception of them in non-Muslim communities. 95. In this sense, Prevent is the opposite of community cohesion, even if, in order to make it more palatable, it has sometimes been presented as the same. What is clear is that Prevent has largely displaced the community cohesion agenda. The amount of money and commitment pouring into Prevent dwarfs the resources that ever went into community cohesion. As one community worker in the north told us, Prevent is taking over the whole public policy arena. Community cohesion and racial equality are subservient to it. 96. While cross-community work in the name of cohesion has suffered, the ideas of shared values and Britishness, also a powerful strand within the community cohesion agenda, have been strengthened by Prevent, especially since the publication of Contest 2. In this respect, Prevent has absorbed from the community cohesion program the part which was most alienating to many Muslims, what is seen as a one-sided demand to assimilate to ill-deemed values of Britishness. A youth service manager in London told us the push for Britishness causes alienation. We become the other. We need to be studied, managed, contained. Every conference we go to on Prevent frames things this way. 97. One of the consequences of focusing significant resources on one group has been the creation of animosity across other groups. A community activist in the Midlands told us. Other communities, Hindus, Sikhs, the black community, are upset that Muslims are getting all this money, even if Muslims themselves don't want to be put in this situation or be labelled. I have had counsellors from other communities saying it is unfair. So, in this way, Prevent reinforces negative attitudes. It does not help to bring about good relations or community cohesion. 98. Similarly, another community activist said with the second round of Prevent funding, people were saying, look, the money only goes to Muslims. Why do you have to be violent extremists to get money? 99 A local authority worker in the Midlands told us that, through Prevent, a mishmash of cultural and religious identity politics was playing out as different groups compete for funds. Existing ethnic divisions are thus being worsened. Communities are becoming more insular. 100 others in the Midlands and London told us that local authorities are trying to keep local Muslim community leaders happy by slicing up the available money to all the local groups. This meant that communities are fragmented in competition over pots of money for projects that are tokenistic. 101. Many interviewees asked why there was not a wider program of preventing extremism across all communities. The Contest 2 strategy document states that because the greatest threat at present is from terrorists who claim to act in the name of Islam, much prevent activity takes place in and with Muslim communities. But the principles of our prevent work apply equally to other communities who may be the focus of attention from violent extremist groups. 102 We have been unable, however, to document any practical prevent work in the community that is not directed in some way at Muslim communities, and we have been unable to ND any examples of work that focuses substantially on far-right extremism. A youth service manager in London said that staff training had included a mention of far-right extremism. However, she added that, while they say extremism refers to all communities, in practice it is all Muslims. She noted that, despite the social exclusion affecting some white communities in her area, there had been no engagement with them in the way that Muslims had been focused on. 103 A voluntary sector worker in the Midlands said people feel that Prevent is aimed only at the Muslim community and is labelling them. If you look at the government's guidance, you will see there is just a cursory paragraph which talks about preventing all forms of extremism. This is all very well, but, in real life, money is only going to the Muslim community. That is not right. The money should tackle all forms of extremism, like the BNP for instance. 104 In Birmingham, the council's Prevent Delivery Plan states that there is a cross-community problem of extremism but then focuses in practice on Muslims. Arguably terrorism affects all the communities across Birmingham, but it is the Muslim communities who will be engaged with regards to the Prevent agenda. This is because Muslim communities are most vulnerable to radicalization, and the agenda seeks to provide support to the people and groups who are making a positive contribution to this agenda. 105. A local authority worker noted that, while police officers engaged in Prevent work talk about the threat of far-right extremism, nothing practical is proposed in relation to it. 106 Someone involved in Prevent told us that there are no projects on the far right. The issue was aired but it was blocked. The idea of bringing together work on far right and Muslim extremists and looking at the problem as a whole was dropped. 107 In Bradford, the City Council presents its Prevent program as adopting a whole community approach that focuses not only on the Muslim community but also on right-wing extremism in white communities and even on animal rights extremists in rural areas. 108 However, the bulk of the projects funded are to do with engaging young Muslims, Muslim women, and mosques. We were also told by managers at the City Council that the Prevent budget in Bradford is about building capacity within Muslim communities so that they can contribute to the agenda positively. But it needed to be done in such a way that other communities also felt it included them. If you just give this money to Muslim communities, you fuel the far-right perception that Muslims get priority. 109 We were repeatedly told by interviewees across England that they were unaware of any work being done on far-right extremism. A voluntary sector worker in the Midlands told us, to my knowledge, there is no work being done on white racist extremism. It's a massive gap. It would be good to do it because then Prevent wouldn't be focused on one community. While all the Prevent stuff is going on, the BNP is growing quietly and effectively. 110 A youth project manager in the north told us, I 24 am not aware of any Prevent projects that look at extremism in non-Muslim communities. 111 Another interviewee stated Prevent should deal with all sections of the community, not just Muslims. But there are no projects that deem extremism to include far-right extremism. I wonder as to the legitimacy of this in terms of race relations legislation. It's so discriminatory. Why is one section of the community being targeted? 112 Elsewhere in the north, a local authority worker told us the main criticism of Prevent has been that it has focused only on the Muslim community rather than the BNP. 113 In recent months, there has been growing concern about the dangers of far-right extremism. 114 In July, Neil Lewington of Berkshire was convicted of preparing a campaign of racist terrorism after chemicals for making rebombs were discovered in his home. 115 The summer of 2009 has also seen activity by the far-right English Defence League, which has marched through Birmingham with the slogan "Deport all Muslims." In August 2009, updated guidance for local Prevent partners was published by the OSCT. 116 This update seemed to signal a shift in emphasis in Prevent work. It noted a desire to learn from feedback that a restriction of activities to Muslim communities discourages some groups from involvement and that bringing communities together is an important part of challenging violent extremism. 117 While the new guidance recognizes that violent far-right groups should also be taken seriously, the measures to be taken on this will be separated from Prevent, resourced separately and, presumably, take a very different form. 118 John Denham, the new Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, indicated, however, that the Prevent strategy would be adjusted and partially renamed to include a focus on white racist groups. This was seen as an acknowledgement that the current policy has alienated many Muslims. 119 It remains unclear what form this shift in emphasis will take in practice. We have already seen that, in order to make them more palatable, some local authorities have felt the need to present their Prevent programs as working across communities to create cohesion. Others have sought to avoid the Prevent tag altogether in order to gain acceptance. Brent, for example, rebranded its Prevent program 2 years ago as Building a Stronger and United West London, working with Muslim communities. 120 Whatever the wording, so long as the projects funded are actually directed at Muslims, with other communities involved only so far as it supports the core objective of a Hearts and Minds campaign among Muslims, the fundamental problem of a discriminatory agenda will remain. Rejecting Prevent. For many community organizations, the introduction of Prevent funding programs has fueled local tensions within the voluntary sector as different groups wrestle with the issue of whether to engage with the program, often in the face of strong pressure from local authorities to accept money and strong pressure from the community to refuse it. There is a growing trend for organizations in the community and voluntary sector to reject Prevent funding as a matter of principle. The manager of a voluntary sector organization in the North told us that, "We decided not to apply for Prevent funding as the whole philosophy is against that of our organization. Our objectives are connecting people for improved community relations, not to focus on the Muslim community, which we feel would have a negative impact on relations." Other organizations have used Prevent funding. Some mosques have taken advantage of the money by enhancing their resource libraries for Muslim communities. But once people start disseminating information on where the money is really coming from, people felt they could not get involved. The main impact of Prevent in this area has been the divisiveness that has been created. This is true of organizations within the voluntary sector, which have scarce resources and have had to adapt their activities in order to attract these funds, and at a community level too, where it has created friction between different communities. What essentially happens is that advocates of the government's position are created. Unusual Muslims are able to claim that they are better equipped to deal with these issues than others, so they should be given the money. The government says okay, but ensure that you say extremism is wrong. And you must teach people to accept our values and obey the law. And you must tell the world that it is okay to be a Muslim here and that you accept things the way they are. 25. Those who have not engaged with Prevent projects are really those working in those organizations which believe in freedom of choice, advocates, like myself, of listening to each other, challenging each other's beliefs and opinions, talking about what we feel is right and wrong and then being free to practice as we wish. This has isolated us. Those who have benefited from this are those Muslim leaders who have now been established as gatekeepers of the community but who just form part of the propaganda machine for the time being. Also, it gets Muslims talking about the negative aspects relating to their communities. The premise of Prevent is that it needs to get Muslims to talk about extremism. Young Muslims are picking up on this and so it doesn't work, they aren't interested in getting involved with the buying of Muslims to work against Muslims. This will only lead to more extremism. It has created mistrust and organizations like ours are consequently devalued. Our organization is now under scrutiny because we are opposed to getting involved with the prevent agenda. We have since been locked into a battle with the council. 121. The manager of a youth project in the north, which had previously worked with prevent funding but had then decided not to, told us. Young people have responded to these projects with a large degree of animosity. There is actually a stigma that is now attached to those that accept prevent funding, that it is dirty money. But money talks at the end of the day. We have worked on numerous prevent projects in the past, but we are going to consciously move away from prevent now because we have become increasingly unhappy with the wider agenda. We know that now we're stopping, we will suffer financially. We will lose about 40% of our income, but there are more important things than money. 122. Some argued that it was missing a trick not to take prevent money and use it to promote peace and well-being across all communities and give people a sense of belonging. The manager of one youth work project in the north told us we've had our fair share of criticism, of people saying, "Why have you taken the money?" But our answer is that the money is benefiting the community. This pot of money is a huge level of support from government. 123 others felt that there needed to be a balance between the opportunity to build capacity, which the Muslim community and voluntary sector had never had, and the dangers associated with accepting prevent funding. Still others felt that, by engaging with prevent, they had a voice within the system and could try to change it from within. On the other hand, some felt that true power to bring about change came from refusing the money and remaining independent. In another example, the Lancashire Council of Mosques was divided over whether to accept the money. A representative of the organisation told us we had some reservations, and so we raised questions with civil servants and senior police. Most people were satisfied with the answers, so we engaged with the process. But this engagement became untenable after Contest 2 was introduced that irritated people a lot. The criteria and the perceptions all seemed to label Muslims as terrorists. The criteria denying extremism were in fact central tenets of Islam. The attitude was to blame the whole Muslim community. We decided we would not tap into funding. Many other mosques took a view that it was better to use public money than let someone else waste it. But we have never received any money. All sorts of groups have taken money instead. It is a waste of public money. 124 A community activist in the north told us, "I have been arguing that we shouldn't take this money because it demonizes Muslims. In other words, it's saying there's a problem with our religion. The prevent strategy takes the Islamic faith as problematic. How can you accept money that tarnishes your religion? Even people who take the money and use it for good things, they are propagating the idea of Islam as being the cause of extremism. It has created tensions and friction in the community between those who have taken the money and those who have not. Hence there is a lot of secrecy. People don't want others in the Muslim community to know that they are sitting on boards and working with the police through prevent. Even those who were advocates, when they saw Contest 2 and the community discussions and public meetings, they withdrew." 125. 26. 27. Another community activist said, "Our organization has been placed between a rock and a hard place. With prevent, we were used as service deliverers rather than strategic partners. If we could have been seen as shaping the agenda, we could have acted as a broker with the community. Instead, we are being told what to do. This made things very difficult for us with other community groups. If we are not careful, our standing within the community falls. The main impact of prevent work locally has been greater mistrust of the police. It's impacted all the wrong way. And there is more reluctance on the part of the Muslim community to engage at all." 126. A worker in the voluntary sector in the north decided not to get involved in prevent because it reinforces the association with Islam and terror, and it implies an acceptance of responsibility. Moreover, he noted that conflicts between Muslims are arising out of this. It's polarizing. Those who take the money are seen as complicit with the government agenda and are sellouts. Those who don't are seen as borderline extremists. 127 The manager of a voluntary sector organization in the Midlands told us we had no option but to apply for prevent funding because of other sources drying up, leaving us in a poor financial situation. But lots of people won't touch this money with a barge pole. People in the Muslim community have held press conferences saying that the money should go back to the government. 128 For many, working on the prevent program has taken its toll on a personal level. One community activist told us the prevent work was so stressful and it caused us a lot of personal anguish. All my family were affected. We are happy not to be involved anymore. 129 Another told us working on prevent has been draining mentally. We have had arguments among ourselves. We've lost sleep over it. We can smell the stench of Islamophobia. A difficulty for Muslim professionals is that we are expected to leave our identity behind in a professional environment. 130. 28. In a panorama program broadcast on 16 February 2009, BBC journalist Richard Watson reported a source at the heart of the government's counter-terrorism work as saying that some prevent projects were actually being used to trawl for intelligence and that many intelligence analysts are already in place. 131 In response, the OSCT stated that any allegation that prevent projects are a cover for spying on people is completely untrue. 132 However, as we show below, there is strong evidence that prevent-funded services are being used by counter-terrorist police for information gathering and that the line between the prevent strand and the investigative pursue strand of the contest strategy is being blurred in a way that is wholly counterproductive. 133 It is entirely appropriate that the police and intelligence services have placed a number of Muslim individuals under surveillance. It is also right that channels should be made available for other professionals such as youth workers and teachers to provide information to the police if there are reasons to believe that an individual is involved in criminality. Moreover, police intelligence might appropriately be shared with other agencies in order to target the delivery of services. What is at issue is whether professionals providing non-policing local services, such as youth workers and teachers, should be expected to routinely provide information to the counter-terrorist police not just on individuals who might be at risk of committing a criminal offense but also on the political and religious opinions of young people, and the dynamics of the local Muslim community as a whole. Our research suggests that a major objective of the prevent program is, in fact, the fostering of much closer relationships between the counter-terrorist policing system and providers of non-policing local services precisely to facilitate these kinds of information on individuals whose opinions are considered extreme and on the local Muslim population in general. This elaborate mapping of Muslim communities is then used not just for the investigation of criminal activity but also to identify areas, groups, and individuals that are at risk of extremism. The evidence that this is the case consists of 1. The fact that prevent-funded voluntary sector organizations and workers in local authorities are becoming increasingly aware of the expectations on them to act as providers of information to the police. The manager of a youth project in the north told us, more and more pressure is being placed on our organization to collude with police needs. We have had a host of requests from the police to collude with them, for example asking us for names of people at meetings and things like "Oh, can you just have a conversation with calls?" When we refuse, we have been told by the police that you are standing in our way and they have tried to undermine our organization. We have been threatened but we have refused to share the beliefs, views, and opinions of people we work with. 134. A youth project manager in London told us, if there are specific individuals at risk you would support them anyway out of a duty of care. But the local Prevent Board is asking for a more general map of Muslim communities. I make confidentiality promises to young people, which I won't break unless it is a matter of child protection or a criminal act. 135 Another youth project manager in London said, you're supposed to report back information to the Prevent Board, such as mapping movements of individuals. You have to provide information if an individual is at risk. But you also need to give information about the general picture, right down to which street corners young people from different backgrounds are hanging around on, what mosques they go to, and so on. There is probably a perception that these are benign procedures, and it is an extension of a general attitude that already exists, for example in the mapping of antisocial behavior. 136. One youth worker in the North said that when, on the grounds of professional confidentiality, he refused to give the police the names of the young people he worked with and information about their religious and political views, he was himself questioned by the police as to his own views. 137. In at least one case, the pressure on youth workers to become information providers is alleged to have escalated into serious mistreatment by intelligence service officers. In May 2009, allegations emerged of intimidation by MI5 agents in Camden. 5 Muslim youth and community workers accused MI5 of waging a campaign of blackmail and harassment in an attempt to recruit them as informants. The men were given a choice of working for the security services or facing detention and harassment in the UK and overseas. 3 of the men say they were detained at foreign airports on the orders of MI5 after leaving Britain on family holidays. 138. In Birmingham, a worker on a youth project, funded by the local authority but not through Prevent, attracted the attention of the intelligence services as a result of his acquaintance with another person who was later convicted of material support to the Taliban. However, this youth worker was himself innocent of any criminal activity and, despite being under surveillance, no evidence against him emerged. In spite of this, it seems that the intelligence services sought to undermine the project where the youth worker was based. A Lee was submitted to the local authority alleging a series of minor misdemeanors by the youth worker in his work. These would not normally have resulted in his dismissal, but, because of the atmosphere of suspicion created around the project, the youth worker lost his job. At the time of writing, the worker is pursuing a case for wrongful dismissal at an employment tribunal. 139. In another case, Prevent funding was approved for a youth center aimed at Muslims in a northern town. The center was to provide sports, keep tea, recreational facilities and careers advice, as well as religious guidance that aimed at providing a counter-extremism narrative. The bid also recommended the inclusion of free IT facilities as it was good for monitoring which websites people were visiting, and intelligence gathering was stated as one of the rationales for the center. 140. Many interviewees were unclear as to who had access to the data they collected in their Prevent work. A person involved in Prevent work in the Midlands said, depending on who you ask, there are different answers to the question of information sharing. I think there is a serious issue around data gathering on participants. Young people won't be aware of what is being collected on them. There isn't any accountability. Even organizations don't know how data will be used. This is a common concern among potential participants. 141. Another person involved in Prevent in the Midlands told us, the perception is that the government is trying to collect information on Muslims in the UK, demographic information that goes beyond the census data, things like, who are the leaders of the Muslim community. The NI35 indicator means that each local authority has to mark itself on how well it is doing in its collection of data, in terms of population, sect, ethnicity, names, and so on. No other community is having such data collected on them in this way. Most of the data collected is about innocent people. To give you one example, if a Prevent project is successfully funded, then the project leaders are subjected to security checks. I can understand this. A local authority does not want to be embarrassed. But now, in some local authorities, the police are saying that anyone who applies under Prevent should be subjected to a security check, which means that even if you don't get funding, you will be subject to an information gathering process and a security check. I have told the police that this is counterproductive. This is what happens when the police have too great an influence. 142. In London, the manager of a voluntary sector organisation told us to start with, there was less pressure. Now it is much more. 29. 30. About surveillance. We were told it is not about surveillance, but it says it is about identifying risks. Who is using this information? How is it being used? The real agenda is to mainstream surveillance across all local authority departments. In the absence of a statutory requirement against Islamophobia, this will feed people's prejudices. 143. A community worker in the north said of Prevent funded projects that any information that they consider sensitive, they have to give it over to the police. Not just for crimes about to be committed but names and telephone numbers of individuals in the community. Youth workers have been told that they have to give information and phone numbers of individuals they are working with. Agencies have to capitulate or lose funding and be put under a lot of pressure. In a context of voluntary sector organizations with low capacity, shortage of funding and an unwillingness to be assertive, you get complicity. 144 An individual involved with Prevent in the Midlands pointed out that youth workers get frustrated as projects turn out to be police data gathering exercises. 145 One manager of a youth work project in the north took the view that, in relation to surveillance, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. He added that there is concern about people's details being passed on. I could not give guarantees that information would not go to the security services. 146. As a number of respondents pointed out, the imposition of information sharing requirements on teachers and youth, community, and cultural workers undercuts professional norms of confidentiality and trust. 2. The fact that information sharing agreements, ISAs, are being introduced to facilitate the systematic flow of information between counter-terrorist police officers and Prevent-funded local service providers. Managers of Prevent-funded services such as youth services are obliged to sign ISAs and follow the protocols listed. The ISA for one local authority area that is a focus of Prevent work states that its aim is to clarify the circumstances under which personal and sensitive information can be shared, for example with the police, in compliance with human rights and data protection legislation. However, compliance is taken as being near. Box 3, the regionalization of intelligence gathering. Counter-terrorist intelligence gathering in Britain has long been carried out by both the police and MI5, also known as the Security Service and based at Thames House, London. Each police force's special branch has historically had as its primary function the carrying out of covert intelligence work in relation to national security and has acted as the local eyes and ears of the security state. In relation to the Connacht in Northern Ireland, MI5 and the mainland special branches developed a close working relationship, with MI5 setting priorities for the police's work. 147. Since 9/11, intelligence gathering activities have expanded dramatically. Funding on counter-terrorism and intelligence has increased from £1 billion in 2001 to an expected £3.5 billion by 2010/11. 148 Between 2001 and 2008, MI5's staff almost doubled in size to about 3,500 and, for the RST time, it established regional offices in population centres other than London. Its staff is expected to rise to 4,000 by 2011, with a quarter working away from London in the 8 new regional offices. Police forces have also consolidated their regional counter-terrorism resources. In London, the Metropolitan Police's Special Branch, SO12, and Anti-Terrorist Branch, SO13, were amalgamated in 2006 into a new Counter-Terrorism Command, also known as SO15. Counter-terrorist units, CTUs, have also been established in recent years in forces outside London in Greater Manchester Police, West Midlands Police and West Yorkshire Police to work alongside MI5's 8 regional offices. There are also counter-terrorist intelligence units in Avon and Somerset Constabulary, Sussex Police, Essex Police, Derbyshire Constabulary, and South Wales Police. Counter-terrorism intelligence officers based in these new regional counter-terrorism units have been recruited to coordinate intelligence gathering. These officers are also central to developing the more intricate working relationship with local authorities that Prevent requires. The number of police officers deployed on counter-terrorism work has risen since 2003 from 1,700 to 3,000. 149. 31. Automatic. The ISA simply states that intelligence gathering is a legitimate public expectation, in the substantial public interest and in the interests of national security. Under the ISA, information collected can be shared for the purposes of, among others, the identification and prioritization of supported action, of individuals of concern and the tracking of identified people through outreach and other related services. Information will also be used to identify priority areas or priority groups of people with the greatest need for intervention. Services funded by Prevent provide a structured environment whereby information on particular people or groups can be brought together. The kind of information to be shared includes what the Data Protection Act deems as sensitive personal data, such as information concerning racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or other similar beliefs, physical/mental health or conditions, sexual life, alleged or committed offenses, proceedings, disposal or sentence concerning any alleged or committed offenses. The effect of these kinds of information sharing arrangements is to draw a whole range of services into the counter-terrorist system, not only by facilitating the flow of information about individuals and communities from public services to the police, but also by bringing public and voluntary sector managers on restricted information from the police, obliging them to keep this information secure and private, and enabling its use in targeting resources. Regular brings to local authorities and explanation of the risks in an area by the police are seen as key ways of building confidence and overcoming the concerns of local authorities on the Prevent program. To this end, the Association of Chief Police Officers has issued guidance to encourage police forces to share sensitive information with local authority chief executives. 150. The greater use of ISAs seems to be a response to the concern expressed last year by an audit commission in Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary report that clearly deemed information sharing protocols are required to enable the brain of a wider audience. This should improve understanding of local vulnerability and encourage intelligence from local and neighborhood levels. 151. As part of the attempt to deepen the involvement of local service providers in the gathering of intelligence, there seems to be a willingness to make a certain amount of restricted information about local perceived risks available beyond those who have been formally vetted. This is seen as a strategy to encourage all local authority services to become potential information sources. Some of the best local information may be gathered at neighborhood level by the street cleaners, wardens, and housing officers. They may see or hear things that are a departure from the normal routine, but may not understand the relevance to violent extremism or know who to pass it on to in the most effective way. 152. 3. The fact that a Bren on Prevent prepared for the Association of Chief Police Officers in March 2008 states that one outcome of the police's involvement in Prevent is the improved ability of the police to develop intelligence in key areas of highest risk through the greater community engagement it enables. 153. As part of its Prevent work, the police are building links with community organizations and local schools. The aim of these links is to encourage flows of information to the police and to manage perceptions of grievances. Schools, youth projects, and women's groups are seen as key organizations to target as part of this community engagement. This might be done, for example, by organizing cricket, boxing, and football matches between police and local Muslim youth teams. And there is a need to continually improve knowledge of communities and how they function both in a social and religious context. 154. The document notes that this engagement process should be supported by neighborhood mapping, which involves taking a range of information about communities in order to enhance understanding of their needs and the dynamics within a community and to target the engagement process. 155. Another police document reveals that there is an effort to acquire knowledge about local Muslim community representatives who might potentially be engaged with. They must be seen to be plausible representatives of their community, not just knowledgeable about it, and there needs to be an awareness that these representatives might have an agenda. 156. The manager of a youth work project in the north told us that it is the police who have undoubtedly benefited from Prevent projects, as they have managed to increase their role within communities. They have increased their resources and been able to steamroll their idea of commu. 32. 90. Engagement throughout. But they don't seem to understand that their engagement fails because they do not have legitimacy and trust within the community. 157. 4. The fact that, across England, new teams of officers have been recruited to counter-terrorism units in police forces to foster close relationships with local service providers as part of the Prevent program. West Midlands Police's Community Engagement and Intelligence Team, for example, is responsible for maintaining a comprehensive knowledge of local communities, key contacts, and emerging community issues. 23 Security and partnership officers have been recruited and trained to forge links with the Muslim community as part of the Prevent Strategy. 158 Lancashire has 12 community engagement officers to promote trust and confidence in relation to Prevent, working closely with local authorities, schools, women and religious groups. 159 Essex Police has created a similar 3-person community engagement team. 160. 5. The fact that, in at least one area, the Prevent program is directly managed by the Counter-Terrorist Police. A West Midlands Police counter-terrorism officer has been permanently seconded to the Equality and Diversity Division of Birmingham City Council to manage its Prevent work. He is supported by 2 workers, a young persons development officer and a researcher/analyst, whose posts are directly funded by the OSCT. Schools as sources of information. In October 2008, the Department for Children, Schools and Families, DCSF, published Learning Together to Be Safe, a toolkit to help schools contribute to the prevention of violent extremism, which gives practical advice for schools in England on equipping young people with the knowledge and skills to challenge extremism. 161 It requests that staff monitor pupils for the warning signs of extremism and offers guidance on detecting trigger points in children who are vulnerable to radicalization. It recommends that schools form good links with police and other partners to share information. 162 The purpose of such links is that Box 4. From multi-agency policing to multi-agency surveillance. The practice of embedding police intelligence gathering in the delivery of other local services was pioneered in Northern Ireland. In the early 1980s, there was a push for this practice to be adopted in British cities. With the reorganisation of policing under Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Kenneth Newman, who had previously served as Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, not only was there an increase in police powers brought in through new legislation, but there was also an effort to incorporate social and welfare agencies into the policing process. Although this was presented as a supportive form of community policing, information gathering was integral to this approach. The aim was to extend the police's influence and tentacles of surveillance ever wider into the community, its schools and social and political institutions, and even the family. 163 This meant a greater degree of intervention on the part of the police in the social services, in education, in planning, in areas that have been the preserve of local government and local authorities. 164 This new approach of coordinated working with social agencies was reflected in the 1982 Police Bill, which, in its original version, proposed a power to search confidential records held by professional persons. 165 As future Cabinet Minister Paul Boateng wrote at the time, without proper accountability, there are very real dangers to civil liberties which could lead all too easily to a police state in which the proper professional distinctions between the roles of social workers, probation officers, local government workers, teachers, and policemen, become confused. 166 Campaigns for police accountability in the early 1980s led to some diminishing of these dangers, and the power to search records was dropped by the time the Police Bill became law, as the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984. Nevertheless, the idea that social agencies coordinate their work with the police took hold and led to multi-agency partnerships between the police and the local authority becoming common practice. Now, in the name of counter-terrorism, the extent to which police forces have integrated themselves into local service delivery is much greater. Schools can help local authorities and police understand tensions affecting their pupils. Schools will observe or hear how communities are feeling, may witness an event that has happened, or be aware that something might happen. In all these 3 types of situation, information from schools is important to help the local authority or police gain a whole community view and so protect young people from harm or causing harm. 167 How then are teachers to spot potential risks? The DCSF toolkit endorses advice from the Quilliam Foundation think tank about behaviors that could indicate a young person is being influenced by extremists and developing a mindset that could lead them to accept and undertake violent acts. The indicators listed include expressions of political ideology such as support for the Islamic political system, a focus on scripture as an exclusive moral source, a conspiratorial mindset, seeing the West as a source of evil in the world, and literalism in the reading of Muslim texts. 168 The Quliam Foundation is also backing up this advice with its radicalization awareness program, training for teachers and other local authority workers on how to spot the signs of extremism. The danger with this is that radical religious and political opinions become mistaken for terrorist indoctrination, especially given the potential problems with the Quliam Foundation's definition of extremism. See Chapter 7. In at least one further education college, it was reported that the names of individual students had been passed to the police because of the views they expressed in a session that was meant to encourage discussion about political issues. 169 These students were then allegedly passed through the Channel program, see below. Police documents listing the individual schools that are of interest in another city in England reveal that many are primary schools. Police community engagement officers will be seeking to build links with these schools to establish oaths of information. In addition, counter-terrorist police officers are telling schools that they need to be informed if a student says something extremist. As one interviewee noted, Prevent is moving towards a focus on thought crimes, especially with the school's toolkit targeting children. How will teachers be trained in this? What will be the effect on children for the rest of their life? 170 Another interviewee noted that teachers need to be equipped to deal with controversial issues of extremism. Educationally, there is nothing to support teachers in discussion of difficult choices. Teachers tell us we don't know how to deal with these issues. It's about building an ethos and capacity in schools to deal with foreign policy issues, and so on. No one believes that controversial discussions can occur without opening up a whole mindset of global injustice and perceptions of grievance. There needs to be a right to protest, and children need to be helped by teachers to do that effectively without bringing the police into the school. 171. The government's Prevent Toolkit for schools locates itself within the broad context of citizenship education. But as Javed Akram and Robin Richardson have written, a well-meaning commitment to engaging with young people as citizens is undermined by the danger that, in practice, schools will be seen as too closely associated with the wider Prevent agenda to have the capacity to win the trust and commitment of teachers, parents, and communities, and of young people themselves. 172 While many school heads are following the government's agenda, some others, it should be noted, are refusing to engage with the police on counterterrorism except in cases where there is an identifiable danger of criminality. The Channel Program. The Channel Program provides for a series of actions that can be carried out to support young people who, through schools or other agencies, are identified to the counter-terrorist police as being at risk of extremism. The government describes Channel as a community-based initiative which uses existing partnerships between the police, local authority, and the local community to identify those at risk from violent extremism and to support them, primarily through community-based interventions. 173 The project was established in April 2007 to provide parents, teachers, and youth workers with training to recognize the warning signs of terrorist grooming and establish a mechanism for intervention. After being piloted in Preston and Lambeth, the project has expanded to a total of 11 areas, another 15 are planned. 174 According to the Association of Chief Police Officers lead spokesperson on terrorism, Norman Bettison, 200 children, some as young as 13, had been identified as at risk of extremism by the Channel Program in its first 18 months of operation and subjected to some form of intervention. 175 From the Blackburn area alone, 80 people have been referred. 33. 34. Through Channel. The OSCT spent £1 million on the Channel Program in 2008/9. 176 In its initial phase, the Channel Program was classified, and it remains the case that very little is known about it. One person who has been involved in working with young people referred through Channel believed that it was merely identifying naughty Muslims rather than genuine cases. Someone else who works with young people referred through the police said badly behaved young persons who happen to be Muslim or who have said something in anger then become known to the system as at risk. 100% of the time so far, There has just been the usual issues with young people, so we refer them to relevant services on issues such as drugs and alcohol, literacy and numeracy, or bereavement. A community worker in the North told us. Channel is based on the idea of community organizations handing over young people to the police. The last time we did that was after the Bradford riots of 2001. The RST generation elders said, "We'll do the right thing and hand those young people over to the police." But what happened was disproportionate sentences. After that precedent, the trust was shattered. Even the elders now don't trust the police. The war on terror has damaged community relations. 177. A person involved with Prevent in the Midlands told us channel has been imposed on the council Prevent group despite community objections. A channel board has been established and those on it have to be criminal record and counter-terrorism checked, but the people on it don't have the skills to recognize extremism. Because I raised concerns about it, my manager said to me, "I hear you're not cooperating with channel." 178. 35. Moderates in extremists. A key aspect of Prevent is the cultivation of moderate Muslims through targeted capacity building and government backing. The aim is to elevate moderate Muslims to becoming the strongest voices in Muslim communities, able to lead a campaign of promoting shared values and isolating the extremists. For Muslim organizations that are able to present themselves as moderate, financial and symbolic resources are being offered by central and local government. Our interviewees identified 3 potential problems which arise when such an approach is put into practice. 1. The terms moderate and extremist are at times deemed in practice by the degree to which Muslims support or oppose central government or local authority policies. The stated aim of Prevent funding is to empower those Muslim organizations which are best placed to prevent individuals from becoming terrorists. The government has decided that the best way to do this is to fund and support those which can be categorized as moderate. The danger is that the distinction between moderate and extremist is flexible enough to be exploited by government to marginalize those who are critical of its policies. According to many of our interviewees, in practice, funding and support is often allocated and withdrawn from organizations depending on whether they align themselves with local and central government, and their policies. The general atmosphere promoted by Prevent is one in which to make criticisms is to risk losing funding and face isolation as an extremist. While those organizations which echo the government's own political line are rewarded with large sums of public money. What this suggests is that Prevent is being used to cultivate politically loyal community leaders, rather than support communities in leading a drive against terrorism. The cultivation of community leaders has a long history within multicultural politics in Britain. The ethnic representatives who began to enter the town halls, particularly following the urban violence of the early 1980s, were often seen by local government as the surrogate voices for their own ethnically deemed communities. Different ethnic groups were pressed into competing for grants for their areas, and the result was that communities became fragmented and divided. Within this system of town hall politics, the religious conservatism of many Muslim community leaders was considered an asset, rather than a fundamentalist threat. When Islam became politicized in Britain in the late 1980s, the search was on for new Muslim leaders who would be considered safe by the government. Eventually the government encouraged the formation of the Muslim Council of Britain, MCB, as a representative body of moderate Muslims. With the launch in this decade of wars on Afghanistan and Iraq, the MCB's position became more fraught. Grassroots pressure forced it to resile from its initial acquiescence in the 2001 Afghan occupation, and it argued forcefully that the war on Iraq would increase terrorism. With the launch of Prevent, which required partners in Muslim communities, the need for a national organization of moderate Muslims who could deliver the counter-extremism message was never greater. At the same time, the MCB was increasingly criticized as itself an extremist organization and, in the summer of 2006, then Communities Minister Ruth Kelly announced that the MCB would no longer be favored by government as the leading representative of Muslims in Britain. Instead, the newly formed Muslim Council, SMC, was held up as a genuinely moderate alternative. Yet, because straightforward political motives for the shift were disavowed, it appeared that the government was expressing a theological preference for Suzum over other trends. The SMC received £203,000 of prevent funding from the DCLG over the next 2 years to establish itself as a community leader. More recently, the Quilliam Foundation, QF, established in April 2008, has come to be seen by central government as the leading moderate Muslim organization, one whose counter-extremism message is closely aligned to its own. QFCO Director Ed Hussain believes that political issues such as the Iraq War are not all that relevant in explaining terrorist attacks in Britain. Rather, the root problem is the politicization of Islam and the solution is the creation of an apolitical Western Islam. The total amount of public money received by QF is not known, but it is reported to be over £1 million. 179. In addition, its Radicalization Awareness Program, RAP, has become a significant vehicle for promoting its analysis of extremism across the public sector, especially in schools. Launched in November 2008, RAP training had been provided to 400 public sector workers by April 2009. 180 between May and July 2009, RAP courses were delivered to the Government Office of East Midlands, Coventry City Council, the Association of Chief Police Officers, the UK Border Agency and Imams in the Midlands. 181 in Wakefield, QF provided 3 one-day RAP training sessions for the police and 47 council employees, such as youth workers, teachers, and social workers, in March 2009. 182. There has been, in recent years, a growing sense that the existing national and local structures of representation through ethnic community leaders have outlived their usefulness. But, with Prevent, central government and local authorities are relying on those same structures for reliable partners in counter-terrorism work. In Bradford, for example, the Council of Mosques, an umbrella organization formed over 20 years ago and a long-standing gatekeeper organization to Bradford's Muslims, is seen as well suited to carry out Prevent work. We're not looking for new organizations to spring up, says a local authority worker. And to bypass established organizations would mean a period of chaos. 183 A local authority worker in the Midlands told us that the allocation of Prevent funding has been a not thing involving jobs for the boys. A lot of patriarchal politics is being played out and there is a real issue of community leaders. Who has the right to be a community leader? Where does gender in? Some savvy and well-connected Muslim groups just take money and do what they want with it because they are friends with the right people. This is where corruption and divisions set in. 184 Another interviewee asked, who are these people claiming they represent the community? We had never heard of them prior to the fund's availability. It's a money-making exercise. The projects they do are very suspect. The end objectives are difficult to measure. It's bordering on fraud. It should be about genuine grassroots community organizations, with a solid track record of community work and engaging young people. What is worse is that our local authority, despite being aware of the concerns, still awards funds to these groups, over genuine bids. 185. Organizations which have refused to work on Prevent projects, been critical of it, or withdrawn from it because of concerns over the issues it raises, have themselves been branded as extremists. This has been a pattern in a number of different areas, see Chapter 4. In reading, for example, the Reading Muslim Council, RMC, a community network which cuts across different ethnic groups in the city, had initially engaged in a forum against extremism and Islamophobia that had been set up in the wake of the 7/7 bombings, becoming a leading partner along with the police and the local authority. 186 However, as the Prevent program developed, the RMC felt that consultation with community organizations and assessment of what actual benefits the work was bringing was giving way to a focus on attracting funding for the sake of it. The RMC learnt more about NI35 and, as a result, it decided to oppose its adoption in reading. A member of the RMC alleged that these concerns about NI35 were ignored by the local Prevent steering group. The government apparently saw reading as an area of good practice and wanted its Prevent work to be tied to the NI35 target. Reading's Prevent steering group was then, we were told, reorganized as a tiered structure with local Muslim community organizations only represented on the lowest delivery tier. Around the same time, the local branch of Hizb ut Tahrir, which is opposed on principle to engaging in the British democratic process, started a 36. Preventing Violent Extremism Crisis Group to campaign against Prevent. The RMC, on the other hand, was making its concerns known within the structures of local accountability and trying to bring about the kind of community consultation that local policymaking is supposed to involve. When the RMC, out of frustration, decided to withdraw from the Prevent agenda, it says that it was itself branded as an extremist organization by other local agencies and lumped together with the local Hizb-ut-Tahrir branch. Eventually, the council persuaded other community leaders to sit on the Prevent delivery group instead. A member of the RMC said in the face of criticisms, the council has gone back to the traditional gatekeepers. But there is a massive problem of uninformed consent, and so-called consultations are really just one big blag. People don't understand the policies they are being consulted on. Extremism is seen by the government as a twisted reading or a misreading of Islam that justifies terrorism. 188 To counter this extremism, the Prevent program seeks to identify and empower moderate Muslims who can offer an alternative reading of Islam. For example, the government is backing road shows of mainstream Islamic scholarship to tour Britain to counter extremist propaganda and denounce it as un-Islamic. 189 This project, run by the Radical Middle Way organization, has received £358,500 from the DCLG in 2008/9. 190 A number of interviewees were supportive of this kind of work. However, others felt that the use of government funding to promote particular interpretations of religious texts is potentially dangerous, irrespective of the theological merits of any such interpretation. As a community worker in the North put it, the state is directly intervening in a faith. The mosque scholars and imams have always been independent, and this is the basis for their moral authority. We are now shifting to the model of state sponsorship. 191. Prevent funding has been widely used to incorporate mainstream mosques into the orbit of local authority funding, professionalizing them and making them partners in the wider Prevent program. Many interviewees felt that a process of reforming mosques was necessary, but they were concerned that, if this process was driven by local authority funding, there would be a loss of independence. An interviewee in the Midlands told us it's good that mosques are having better structures and governance. But announcements of political demonstrations after Friday prayers are now more difficult because of the fear that funding will be jeopardized. 192. Most local authorities funded to do Prevent work by the DCLG have included some kind of engagement with mosques as part of their program. In particular, moderate mosques are being encouraged to engage with young people and win them over, an area in which they are seen as weaker than extremists at present. In Walsall, for example, the Prevent Action Plan includes training for imams to identify individuals who show signs of misinterpreting the Quran. 193 In Bradford, the Council of Mosques has been supported by Prevent funding of £80,000 from the DCLG's Community Leadership Fund in 2008/9 to develop a teaching resource for madrasas known as Nasiha. 194 Much of the resource is an impressive attempt to introduce key religious concepts. There is a perception, however, that, on occasion, the resource might appear too eager to interpret the original Islamic sources as having meanings useful to the Prevent program. For example, verses are interpreted as meaning that the root cause of extremism, racism, and bullying is hatred, and all three can destroy a community. Hatred can also lead to arrogance and anti-Western sentiments. Again, this is not what Islam teaches. 195 Another verse is interpreted as meaning we have to communicate with our local authorities and get involved in electing suitable leaders for our regions. 196. One interviewee noted the need for good sources of information on questions of women in Islam, on Islamic history, and so on. But, she added, in modern societies, governments shouldn't tell people what to believe. 197 The manager of a voluntary sector organization in the Midlands was concerned that within this work, people are trying to impose their version of Islam. But when you bring in a particular interpretation, you should bring in all interpretations and include every other school. No government has the right to tell people what their religion is, so we should avoid using religion and theology in this work. 198. Moreover, a community worker in the north said that, in some contexts, agencies are deploying a distinction between extremist and moderate that is straightforwardly sectarian and theological. For example, Salas are classed as extremists and Cis are classed as moderates, or Deobandis are classed as extremists and Barrelwis are classed as moderates. 199. It is worth noting that the Quilliam Foundation, one of the government's key partners in the PREVENT program, arguably promotes adherence to what it regards as the traditional scholarship of Sunnah preachers as an antidote to extremism. 200. The perception that the government is sponsoring Muslim organizations on the basis of theological criteria, for example, holding Cis to be more favorable than Salas, runs counter to the secular separation of church and state. Even though such a separation is itself upheld as a marker of moderation which Muslims should aspire to. As Asma Jahangir, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, pointed out in her 2008 report on the UK, it is not the government's role to look for the true voices of Islam or of any other religion or belief, since religions or communities of belief are not homogeneous. In June 2007, a new department within the Home Office SOSCT was established, known as the Research, Information and Communications Unit, RICU. Its role in relation to PREVENT is to provide advice and guidance to local authorities, people working on community cohesion projects, local police, neighborhood policing teams. 201 on how to implement effective communication strategies in order to challenge the ideologies behind violent extremism. 202 According to Charles Farr, the head of the OSCT, this advice is useful when they are, for example, with a Muslim community organization or in another community forum. 203. One of the ways in which the RICU does this is by sending out a weekly newsletter providing background to topical news stories and issues that resonate in communities. What this means in practice is a list of current issues that Muslims are thought to be concerned about, along with the key points of the government's narrative on these issues, so that local authorities can effectively communicate these points in their work. The RICU has also held a series of workshops throughout England to promote counter-terrorist strategic communications with local authorities. In September 2007, the RICU produced a guidance document for use in PREVENT programs that outlined its recommended approach to communicating effectively with community audiences. Its purpose was to clarify the top-line counter-terrorism messages that the government wanted to communicate as part of its Hearts and Minds strategy. The document emphasized that implying specific communities are to blame for terrorism is counterproductive and that it is better to speak of the values that we all share and that we all need to work together to tackle the terrorist challenge. The document aimed to show how language can be used to create an inclusive basis that is able to draw mainstream Muslims into counterterrorism work and isolate the extremists from the rest of the Muslim community. But, importantly, this message needs to be communicated without mentioning the Muslim community as the target of this message, because this would itself be alienating and imply that the Muslim community was somehow responsible. 204. The RICU also has programs attempting to gauge changing attitudes in Muslim communities towards key tests and issues of terrorism, not just through commercial polling companies but also through its own more rigorous programs. 205. It has commissioned research on the identity of young Muslims, how young Muslims use the Internet, media consumption of British Muslims and the impact of different counter-extremism messages on domestic and foreign Muslim audiences. Other RICU studies have examined the reach of Islamist blogs, the credibility to Muslims of different voices and a series of studies of attitudes to Britishness and terrorism. 206. Entities. It seems advisable to acknowledge and take into account the diversity of voices. The contents of a religion or belief should be deemed by the worshippers themselves. 207. In addition, there is a risk of discovering extremists where none exist, if an interpretative framework based on the simple binary of moderate and extremist is imposed on the complex and dynamic picture of Muslim religious life. For example, since the 1990s, a major trend among young Muslims has been identification with the global Ummah as a third-way alternative to either assimilating into what many perceive to be a hostile society or following their parents' religio-cultural traditions, which are bound up with South Asian languages, poetry, and folk practices such as reverence for holy men or peers. The emphasis is thus on purifying oneself from these cultural accretions which are seen as contaminating the Islamic message. This return to the original Islamic texts and a global version of Islam is often seen as a solaced precursor to extremism, although it is more likely to lead to new kinds of positive engagement with British society. 208. 3. The terms moderate and extremist are at times deemed by the degree to which Muslims declare an allegiance to Britishness or the West, which confuses counter-terrorism with an attempt to reshape cultural identity. The Contest 2 counter-terrorist strategy document indicates that the government's definition of extremist includes those who reject and undermine our shared values. 209. Hazel Blear's March 2009 speech introducing Contest 2 argued further that promoting a positive idea of British culture as a set of shared, liberal values is now seen as central to preventing violent extremism. 210. She added that, in order to promote this counter-narrative of Britishness, current liberal tolerance of diversity needed to be diminished so that the defense of British values can be pursued without impediment. 211. As we noted in Chapter 4, the OSCT sees the rejection of Western culture as something that should be challenged as part of the PREVENT program. A number of interviewees highlighted the danger that such an approach risks confusing counterterrorism with a quite different project of reshaping the cultural identities of Muslims to be more pro-Western. Interviewees spoke of such an approach causing alienation as it makes judgments on the opinions and attitudes of a very wide group of Muslims in, ironically, a most illiberal way. Some organizations have withdrawn from the PREVENT program as this cultural aspect has become more prominent, see Chapter 4. In practice, this approach to preventing violent extremism is counterproductive as it ends up expecting Muslims in general to mobilize around notions of Britishness imposed from above, thereby alienating the very people that need to be won over. Hearts and minds. The basis for this theological and cultural approach to preventing violent extremism is twofold. First, there is the idea that terrorist radicalization is rooted in a religio-cultural rejection of Western modernity. Second, is the idea that such rejection needs to be combated by a government-led battle of ideas. 212. This battle of ideas has become an increasingly prominent aspect of counterterrorism in recent years. The war on terror that was led by the US and UK governments following 9/11 initially had two separate dimensions, one broadly domestic and involving policing the use of emergency powers under anti-terrorist legislation to detain and deport suspected terrorists outside of the normal procedures of criminal law, and the other a foreign policy of launching wars of humanitarian intervention to export democracy to regions which were thought to produce terrorism. The enemy was deemed as evil individuals and rogue states. But in recent years, a new way of thinking about counterterrorism has become dominant, which sees the enemy as insurgents attempting to win a base of support among Muslim populations and engaged in a conflict that therefore has both military and political dimensions. It is not seen as a clash of civilizations so much as a battle within the Islamic world between moderates and extremists, each trying to win over mainstream Muslims. The appropriate strategy therefore involves not only hard power, military force and coercive policing, but also soft power, a battle of ideas to prevent violent extremism, and, rather than speak of a war on terror, it is more appropriate, on this new view, to speak of a long war of global counterinsurgency. 213. The government sees the emergence of an interlinked global insurgency as the real threat represented by Al-Qaeda at various moments. Al-Qaeda and its associates have made the transition from terrorism to insurgency. Notably in Iraq and Afghanistan. As insurgencies they have posed a 39. different and a wider threat to the UK and its interests than their forebears. 214. The terrain on which this battle of ideas is to be fought is thus the attitudes and opinions of mainstream Muslims in Britain. The possibility of anti-Western extremists winning over mainstream Muslims to their cause comes to be seen as a strategic challenge to British national security. The danger here is that British Muslims become, in the imagination of the counter-terrorist system, no longer citizens to whom the state is accountable but potential recruits to a global counter insurgency that is threatening the state's prospects of prevailing in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. This international dimension means that the attention focused on this extremism is of a completely different kind to that focused on, say, right-wing extremism, which is taken to be no more than a public order threat. What emerges is a determination that the problem can only be fully addressed if Muslims take it upon themselves to do more, to actively mobilize against the extremists, and that therefore more pressure should be brought to bear upon Muslims in general and their community organizations. The central problem with this battle of minds strategy is that, despite all its efforts to map and survey Muslims in Britain, it ends up creating a false image of Britain's Muslim citizens. The dichotomy between moderate and extremist does not correspond to the ways in which Muslims actually live their lives and the extent to which ordinary Muslims are caught up in an ideological struggle between competing versions of Islam is hugely overstated. An al-Qaeda-type ideology does not constitute a viable alternative belief system for all but a tiny number of individuals in Britain. To believe otherwise is to conceive of Muslims as living in a moral universe that is separate from the rest of the population. Not only is this inaccurate, but it also stigmatizes Muslims as morally retrograde. Moreover, interviewees argued that it ignores other analyses of radicalization which focus less on religio-cultural ideology and more on terrorism as a manifestation of a political conflict over Western foreign policy or as part of a general problem of youth violence. The French scholar of Islamism Olivier Roy has, for example, recently argued that the process of violent radicalization has little to do with religious practice, while radical theology, as Salasm, does not necessarily lead to violence. 215. He adds that to promote a moderate Islam against al-Qaeda's bad Islam would actually be counterproductive as it elevates al-Qaeda's narrative to a religious phenomenon. 216. Finally, many interviewees were concerned that one effect of a battle of ideas approach was to undermine exactly the kind of radical discussions of political issues that need to happen if young people are to be won over and support for political violence diminished. The manager of a voluntary sector organization in the North told us that speaking out can lead to people being deemed as an extremist. This leads to a vague but strong sense of victimhood in the community as they feel targeted, and this encourages people to hunker down, which is both isolating and disempowering. Prevent is then perceived as just another stick to beat them with and creates a sense of being under siege. 217. A person involved with Prevent in the Midlands said a good organization should be able to say to young people, "What are your feelings on the Middle East?" without putting them in a corner as extremists. My concern about the current approach is the emphasis on depoliticization. Actually, you should want to politicize young Muslims, to get them to engage democratically and have a voice. Another said the idea of legitimate dissent is being restricted. There is an idea of a model Muslim. It seems to be less about preventing violence and more about a palatable Muslim community. 218. As Birmingham councillor Salma Yaqub has written, by denying the legitimacy of democratic opposition to government foreign policy from Muslims, and by promoting and recognizing only those Muslims who toe the line, government policy is serving to strengthen the hands of the genuine extremists, those who say that our engagement in the democratic process is pointless or wrong. The danger of this approach is that it serves to squeeze the democratic space for dissent within the Muslim community. If Muslim organizations are reluctant to provide the space for sensitive discussions for fear of extremists' accusations, where are these young people to go? Where will their views and concerns get an airing? The answer is obvious. They will be expressed in private and secret, with the genuine extremists keen to provide listening ears and simplistic solutions. 219. This suggests that the dictum that communities defeat terrorism is correct. But for this to happen in a way that is genuinely communal, a fundamentally different approach is required. As the Anisa Society put it in its report on Prevent, the starting point for this different approach would be to cease dealing with the whole Muslim community through the prism of anti-terrorism. 220. A genuinely 41. Communities-led approach to counter-terrorism would treat Muslims as citizens with their own ideas, their own definition and understanding of the problem. The manager of a voluntary sector organization in the Midlands said, "The causes of extremism are a whole host of things. But the ability to contribute to Britain is a big factor. Everyone should be able to contribute to this society and feel a sense of belonging. What we need to do is to create spaces for people to reason and explore who they are. We need independent thinking. 221 The manager of a youth project in the north told us, young people are always being told not to be angry, but it should be okay to be angry as long as you express yourself in an effective way. The outcomes we should be after are being able to articulate an argument, to be able to link with people from different communities. But under prevent we are forced to deem our outcomes in terms of how many people have gone through a political conversion from extremist to liberal. 222. And Salma Yaqub has written, what I would do is use the money to have genuine debate, not pushing a line but having an open discussion. That's the best way to challenge violent extremist rhetoric. You can't shy away from radical political criticism. We must create the space within the community where our young people feel free to speak openly about how they feel as young Muslims growing up in a country where their identity is constantly contested. The best antidote to the appeal of extremism is to create a model of critically engaged citizenship. That will only happen when more young Muslims engage in the political process and are content and assertive about expressing their concerns, irrespective of whether it offends the government or not. 223. As so many interviewees noted, this kind of empowerment of young people needs to start with the experiences of young people themselves rather than a state-centered agenda. Issues such as racism, Islamophobia, social exclusion, and everyday violence are likely to be central. The terrors that young people experience in their everyday lives involve bullying, taunting, victimization and harassment from peers at school, local gangs, police, the media and, in some cases, members of their own families. 224 In the end, community participation cannot be faked and, in democratic societies, genuine trust can only come from the bottom up. So long as the government persists in a program of imposing on its own citizens an ideological war over values that is backed up with an elaborate web of surveillance, that trust will not be forthcoming. And those on the receiving end of such a program will remain spooked by fear, alienation, and suspicion.